rain hammered down on the steel bridge like bullets against armor, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller fragments that caught the dying light of evening. Below, the river churned with a violence that seemed almost alive, its dark waters swirling in hungry eddies that promised nothing but destruction to anything foolish enough to fall into its embrace. The wind howled through the bridge's cables, creating an eerie symphony that would have sent most people running for shelter. But Jack Miller wasn't most people. The 35-year-old man stood frozen on the bridge's walkway, his work-worn hands gripping the cold metal railing so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His weathered face, marked by years of night shifts and endless worry, was a mask of pure terror as he stared down at the small figure dangling from the bridge's edge. 8-year-old Emily Miller hung suspended in the storm, her tiny fingers wrapped around a piece of twisted metal that was all that stood between her and the churning abyss below. "Daddy, help me!" Emily's voice cut through the wind like a knife through Jack's heart. Her blonde pigtails whipped frantically in the storm, and her bright blue eyes, so much like her mother's, were wide with terror. The pink dress she'd insisted on wearing to school that morning was now soaked through, clinging to her small frame as she fought to maintain her grip on the slippery metal. Jack's mind raced as he calculated his options. The bridge was old, its railings worn smooth by decades of weather and neglect. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and his daughter would be lost forever. Around him, a crowd had begun to gather, curiosity seekers drawn by the commotion, their phones held high to capture what might become tragedy. But not one of them stepped forward to help. "Please." Jack called out to anyone who would listen, his voice breaking with desperation. "Someone help me. She's going to fall." But the crowd remained frozen, mesmerized by the unfolding drama, content to watch rather than act. Jack felt his heart breaking as he realized he was truly alone in this moment that would define the rest of his life. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the storm, but Jack knew they might not arrive in time. Emily's grip was weakening, her small fingers beginning to slip on the rain-slicked metal. In that moment of crushing realization, a woman appeared beside him, elegant, composed, her dark hair barely disturbed by the howling wind. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge, her expensive coat a stark contrast to Jack's worn work clothes. "I can help," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. But it wasn't the offer of assistance that stopped Jack cold. It was the way she looked at Emily, as if seeing a ghost from her own past. The woman's perfectly composed facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something that looked almost like recognition in her steel-gray eyes. This stranger's arrival would prove to be the first thread in a tapestry of secrets that would unravel everything Jack thought he knew about his daughter's past. For Emily Miller wasn't just any child hanging from that bridge. She was the missing piece of a puzzle that had haunted one of the city's most powerful families for nearly a decade. And the woman who had appeared so mysteriously in their darkest hour held the key to a truth that would change all their lives forever. Jack Miller had always believed that a man's worth wasn't measured by the size of his bank account or the address on his driver's license, but by the strength of his character and the depth of his love for those who mattered most. At 35, his hands bore the calluses of honest work, first as a firefighter who'd run into burning buildings while others ran out, and now as a night shift mechanic who coaxed life back into broken engines. His face, weathered by sun and worry, told the story of a man who'd faced his share of hardship and emerged stronger for it. The small apartment he shared with Emily wasn't much to look at, 2 bedrooms in a building where the elevator worked half the time, and the heat was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. But Jack had made it into a home with the fierce determination that had carried him through military service and the devastating loss of his wife 3 years earlier. Every morning, he made Emily's lunch with the same precision he'd once used to maintain his firefighting equipment, and every evening, he helped her with homework at their second-hand kitchen table. Emily Miller was her father's daughter in every way that mattered. At 8 years old, she possessed a spirit that seemed too large for her small frame, a laugh that could fill their tiny apartment with warmth, and a stubborn streak that reminded Jack painfully of her mother. Her blonde hair, usually neat in pigtails, that Jack had learned to braid through countless YouTube tutorials, framed a face that was pure innocence, touched by wisdom beyond her years. But beneath Emily's bright exterior lay a shadow that Jack fought desperately to keep at bay, the congenital heart condition she'd inherited from her mother's side of the family. Victoria Harrington moved through the world with the practiced elegance of someone born to privilege and shaped by power. At 34, she commanded respect in boardrooms, filled with men twice her age, her sharp intellect and ruthless business acumen having earned her the position of CEO of Harrington Industries before her 32nd birthday. Her dark hair was always perfectly styled, her designer suits tailored to perfection, and her steel gray eyes missed nothing. But Victoria harbored secrets that would have shocked those who thought they knew her. Behind the polished exterior and the reputation for being carved from ice, she carried a pain that had shaped every decision she'd made for the past 8 years. William Harrington was a man who had never learned to accept defeat. At 68, he ruled his business empire with an iron fist that had crushed competitors and built fortunes, but had failed to heal the wound at the heart of his own family. His silver hair was still thick, his posture still commanding, and his blue eyes still sharp enough to read the fine print on contracts that lesser men would need magnifying glasses to decipher. He wore his wealth-like armor, the finest suits money could buy, watches that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and an air of entitlement that came from generations of Harrington privilege. But for all his success, William was haunted by a failure that no amount of money could fix. The morning of the bridge incident had started like any other in the Miller household, with Jack rushing to pack Emily's lunch while she struggled to tie her shoes with fingers still clumsy from sleep. The bills on the kitchen counter seemed to multiply overnight, each envelope containing another demand for money that Jack didn't have. The notice from the garage where he worked had arrived 3 days earlier. Budget cuts meant layoffs, and Jack's refusal to look the other way when his supervisor skimmed money from customer repairs had made him a target. The call from Emily's school came during his lunch break, the principal's voice tight with concern, as she explained that Emily had gotten into an argument with her classmates about a field trip that required a permission slip and a $20 fee. The other children had made cruel comments about Emily's worn clothes and secondhand backpack, and she had run off during recess, tears streaming down her face. By the time the teachers realized she was missing, Emily was already 6 blocks away, running toward the old bridge that crossed the river at the edge of town. Together, Jack and Victoria worked with desperate efficiency, Victoria holding Jack's legs as he leaned over the railing, stretching his arms toward Emily's failing grip. The crowd watched in silence, some still recording, others finally putting away their phones, as they realized they were witnessing something profound: a father's love measured against impossible odds, a stranger's unexpected compassion, and a child's fierce will to survive. When Jack finally pulled Emily up and over the railing, crushing her against his chest as they both collapsed onto the bridge's walkway, Victoria found herself crying tears she hadn't shed in years. The weeks that followed transformed Jack's quiet life into something resembling chaos. Victoria Harrington didn't disappear back into her privileged world as he'd expected. Instead, she inserted herself into their lives with a persistence that felt both generous and invasive. She arranged for Emily to be treated at the city's best private hospital, paying bills that would have bankrupted Jack without blinking. She had Emily's heart condition evaluated by specialists who normally had waiting lists months long. What Jack couldn't have known was that Victoria was playing a much longer game, one that involved DNA samples carefully collected from Emily's hospital stay and rush processed through labs that specialized in discretion. The results arrived in a sealed envelope that contained the power to destroy or rebuild lives. The genetic markers were unmistakable. Emily Miller was the granddaughter that William Harrington had never met, the living legacy of a daughter he had lost through his own stubborn pride. 8 years ago, William's daughter Sarah had left home after a bitter fight about an arranged marriage designed to merge 2 powerful families. Sarah had chosen love over duty, walking away from billions to marry a young firefighter she'd met during a charity event. William had been furious, cutting her off completely, refusing even to acknowledge her existence when she tried to reconcile after Emily was born. Sarah's death, 3 years earlier, had been reported as a tragic accident, a young mother lost to complications from a heart condition she'd passed on to her daughter. What the papers hadn't reported was that Sarah had died alone, too proud to reach out to a father who had disowned her. The confrontation Victoria had been dreading finally came in William's penthouse office. She sat across from her father, the DNA report spread between them like evidence in a trial. The old man's face had gone ashen as he read, his powerful hands shaking as the implications sank in. "She's been living 6 miles from here," Victoria said quietly. 6 miles, William. If you had swallowed your pride 8 years ago, you could have watched her grow up. You could have saved Sarah. William Harrington had spent too many years believing that money could solve any problem, that power could reshape reality to match his desires. Instead of approaching the situation with delicacy, he chose to do what he'd always done, take what he wanted through whatever means necessary. The legal papers arrived on Jack's doorstep on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who spoke in carefully measured tones about custody arrangements and the best interests of the child. The documents were thick with legal terminology that Jack barely understood, but their meaning was crystal clear. Someone was trying to take Emily away from him. The name at the bottom of the papers made Jack's blood run cold. William Harrington wasn't just any wealthy businessman, he was a legend in the city. A man whose influence reached into every corner of power and privilege. The answer to Jack's confusion came during their first court hearing, delivered in a voice that was cold enough to freeze water. "Emily Miller is my granddaughter," William announced to the packed courtroom. "Her mother was my daughter, Sarah, who died because she was too proud to accept help from her family. I will not make the same mistake with her daughter. The child deserves better than a life of poverty with a father who can't even afford her medical bills." The words hit Jack like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. Emily's mother had been a Harrington, the woman he'd loved. The woman who had chosen him over wealth and privilege had been the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city. And she had died without ever telling him the truth about her past. "You knew," Jack said, turning to look at Victoria where she sat in the gallery. "All this time, all that helped you knew who she was." Victoria's composed mask finally cracked completely, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jack. But Emily is my niece. Sarah was my sister." Emily's surgery was scheduled for the following week. A procedure that would repair her heart condition once and for all. It was exactly what Jack had prayed for. The miracle he'd dreamed of but never dared hope for. But it came wrapped in a Faustian bargain. William Harrington would pay for everything, but only if Jack agreed to share custody. "Think about what's best for her," William said during their private meeting, his blue eyes cold as winter sky. "I can give her everything, the best schools, the best doctors, opportunities you could never dream of providing. All I ask is that you put aside your pride and do what's right for your daughter." But Jack had learned something about himself during those desperate moments on the bridge. His love for Emily wasn't something that could be negotiated or compromised. "She's not a possession," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his insides. "She's a little girl who's already lost her mother. I won't let you take away her father, too." The surgery took place on a Tuesday morning in October, in an operating room that gleamed with technology that most hospitals could only dream of owning. Jack sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white, watching the clock tick away the hours that would determine his daughter's future. Victoria sat across from him, her usual composure replaced by raw anxiety. The surgeon emerged 4 hours later, his face wearing the satisfied expression of a craftsman who had completed a masterpiece. Emily's surgery had been a complete success. Her heart was now as strong as any child her age, the defect that had threatened her life corrected with precision and skill that bordered on artistry. The final confrontation took place in William's office high above the city. Jack had never been in a building so tall, had never walked through hallways lined with artwork that probably cost more than he would make in a lifetime. William sat behind a desk the size of Jack's entire living room, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit more expensive than Jack's car. "The papers are ready," William said without preamble, gesturing to custody documents. "Emily will spend weekdays with you and weekends with me. I'll handle all her expenses and provide a trust fund. In return, you acknowledge my parental rights." Jack stared at the papers without touching them. William's expression hardened. "Then we go back to court, and I use every resource at my disposal to prove that you're an unfit father. I'll win, Mr. Miller. I always win." "You know what?" Jack said, standing up with a calm that surprised even him. "You're right. You probably would win in court. You have better lawyers, more money, more influence than I could ever dream of having. But you're missing something important." William raised an eyebrow. "And what might that be?" "Emily," Jack replied simply. "She's not a business deal. She's a little girl who's already lost her mother. And she's smart enough to understand what's happening here. Do you really think she's going to respect you when she finds out you tried to buy her love?" For the first time since Jack had met him, William Harrington looked uncertain. "I'm trying to give her opportunities," William said. But his voice lacked conviction. "I'm trying to make up for the mistakes I made with Sarah." "No," Jack said firmly. "You're trying to control her the same way you tried to control her mother, and we both know how that worked out." The accusation hit its target with devastating accuracy. William's face went pale as he remembered the last conversation he'd had with Sarah, The harsh words, the ultimatums, the stubborn refusal to bend that had driven away the only person who had ever truly loved him. "Sarah chose you over me," William whispered. And for the first time, Jack heard pain in the old man's voice. "She threw away everything I had built for her just to marry a firefighter who couldn't give her anything but love. And she was happy," Jack replied quietly. "Poor as we were, struggling as we did, she was happier than she'd ever been in her life. She told me so every day, until the day she died. Can you say the same about your relationship with her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. And William found himself face to face with a truth he had spent 8 years trying to avoid. His wealth hadn't made Sarah happy, it had driven her away. His power hadn't protected her. It had isolated her when she needed family most. "What do you want from me?" William asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to be Emily's grandfather," Jack said simply. "Not her owner. Not her benefactor. Just her grandfather. Someone who loves her enough to let her choose her own path, even if it's not the path you would have chosen for her." The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Victoria proved to be the bridge that made peace possible, her guilt over her role in the custody battle awakening, something that had been dormant for years, a conscience that refused to be bought or silenced. She began standing up to her father in ways that shocked both him and herself, helping him understand that being Emily's grandfather meant supporting her choices rather than making them for her. Jack found himself caught between wariness and gratitude as he watched the Harrington family dynamics evolve. Part of him would always resent the trauma they had put him through, but another part recognized the genuine effort William was making to change. The breakthrough came during Emily's 9th birthday party, held in the community center of their neighborhood. William had initially suggested hosting the party at his mansion, but instead found himself sitting on a folding chair in a room decorated with homemade streamers, watching his granddaughter laugh with friends whose parents worked jobs similar to Jack's P.S. Emily opened her gifts with enthusiasm. Jack's present was a bicycle he had bought secondhand and restored himself. Victoria gave her a locket that had belonged to Sarah, but it was William's gift that surprised everyone. Not an expensive toy, but a simple photo album filled with pictures of Sarah's childhood, each one carefully labeled with memories he had thought he'd forgotten. "Tell me about this one," Emily said, pointing to a photograph of her mother at age 10, grinning at the camera while holding a trophy. William's voice was soft as he told the story. "She built a volcano that actually erupted," he said. "Made the biggest mess you've ever seen. But she was so proud of that trophy. Your mother was never afraid to get her hands dirty if it meant learning something new." Emily listened with rapt attention, absorbing every detail about the mother she barely remembered. And in that moment, watching his daughter connect with her grandfather through shared stories and love, Jack finally began to believe that maybe they could make this complicated family arrangement work. The legal custody battle was resolved not in a courtroom but around Jack's kitchen table. Emily would spend most of her time with Jack, attending her neighborhood school and maintaining the friendships that grounded her. But she would also spend regular time with William and Victoria, learning about her mother's family and the opportunities that came with the Harrington name. The financial support would flow without strings attached. Emily's medical needs would be covered, her education funded, and her future secured through trust funds that she couldn't access until she was old enough to make her own decisions. Jack's pride had initially balked at accepting so much help, but he had come to understand that providing for Emily was more important than protecting his ego. 1 year after the bridge incident, Jack found himself standing in the same spot where he had nearly lost everything that mattered to him. But this time, Emily was safely beside him, her hand in his as they watched the river flow peacefully beneath them. Her heart was strong, her future secure, and her family complicated as it was finally at peace. "Do you remember being scared here?" Jack asked gently, squeezing her hand. Emily looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "I remember you saving me," she said simply. "And I remember that lady who helped us. And the sad man who turned out to be Grandpa William. Do you understand now why they wanted to help us?" Jack asked. Emily considered the question with seriousness. "They wanted to help because they loved Mama. And they love me. But they didn't know how to show it the right way at first." Jack marveled at his daughter's ability to see through the complications and focus on the essential truth. "And how do you feel about all of it now?" "I feel lucky," Emily replied without hesitation. "I have you, and I have them. And I'm healthy. and we don't have to worry about money anymore. Mama would be happy, don't you think? Jack felt tears prick at his eyes as he nodded. Sarah would indeed be happy, not just because Emily was healthy and secure, but because her family had finally learned what she had always known, that love couldn't be bought, controlled, or negotiated. It could only be given freely, accepted gratefully, and treasured above all the wealth and power in the world. As they walked back toward home, Emily's small hand secure in his, Jack reflected on the lessons the past year had taught him. He had learned that pride could be a luxury he couldn't afford when his daughter's future was at stake. He had discovered that accepting help didn't make him weak, it made him wise, and he had come to understand that family wasn't always defined by blood or law, but by the willingness to fight for each other when it mattered most. The bridge behind them stood unchanged, its steel frame weathered but strong, spanning the distance between two sides of the river, just as love had ultimately spanned the distance between two very different worlds. And somewhere above them, Jack liked to think that Sarah was smiling, watching over the family she had brought together through her love and the daughter who had inherited her courage, her heart, and her unshakable belief in the power of love to conquer even the most impossible odds.